This is going to be a sustainable sewing project for Halloween using things that I already have around my home, and I'm going to be helped by my two familiars, a vampire bat and a hairy spider, to sew dyed damask napkins into a colourful pumpkin themed apron using a vintage sewing pattern and decorated with embroidered witchy appliqués. For a quick and fun Halloween project, Arietta of Arietta's Vintage Life and I thought it would be fun to sew a Halloween inspired spooky apron, and to do it using fabrics or items that we already had in our home. So I'm going to be doing mine from a little pile of napkins that I bought from a local charity shop or thrift store, and which I'm going to be dyeing to make a patchwork apron, and then adding some spooky applique shapes. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Arietta does too. Started with my pile of napkins, and I bought 3 just hand washed dyes in orange, black and yellow. Use these hand washed cold water dyes, and I mixed up the colours. I added a little bit of black to both the orange and the yellow because I didn't want colours that were too bright. So it's going to be a very economic and sustainable project. The napkins, because people don't use fabric napkins anymore, do they? And yet they're made of beautiful linens, often beautiful damask linens. So the whole project is going to cost me £3 for the napkins and about £5 each for the dyes, so under £20 for my apron. I dyed all the napkins, left them to dry overnight. And as you can imagine, it took quite a while to iron all those damask linen napkins, but at the end I had a nice pile of them all in different shades of pumpkin. And I then decided, because the napkins were quite large squares, to cut each one into 4 smaller squares. And I did this by folding them, as you can see, folding them over and folding them again, and then cutting down the fold lines. Now napkins, although square, aren't completely even, and this did mean that my patchwork wasn't perfect, but I didn't feel like it needed to be, because I was going to be cutting the patchwork into the pattern pieces to sew into the apron. So as you can see, I literally pressed down on the fold lines with the napkin folded twice into a square, and then used those fold lines to cut along with a rotary cutter to create 4 squares from each of my napkins. I stitched the patchwork together, not very neatly, quite quickly. Patchworkers and quilters might want to avert their eyes. I sewed it together to make one big piece. And I'm just holding it up here to show you. So this is now the fabric for my vintage apron. And then I cut out my apron shapes using this vintage sewing pattern. It's quite a covering apron. I can use it to cover most items of clothing, just to create an autumnal and spooky themed Halloween garment. And if you look closely at my patchwork squares, I love how the individual patterns of the damask napkins are showing through. I think that adds a really beautiful textural and almost quite mysterious finish to the fabric. I just wanted to show you how the front fits together. So this is one of the side front pieces. You can see that the pocket is just under here. The side front is shaped into a pocket, and then there's a pocket facing that is then stitched around it, and then I'll cover that edge in bias tape. And then the lower side front is stitched over, and that has this shape with a scallop that is then bound in bias binding. So that's the lower side front stitched over the pocket. So The pocket section is attached to the upper side front with a facing. The lower side front is stitched over it, and then the bias binding. And then if I move that over, we've got the front, which will also be finished. The neckline will be finished in the bias binding. And then similarly on this side, there is side front and the lower side front with the pocket repeated on the other side. And then of course the seams will be joined to create the whole front section. Cut out some applique shapes from some of the colourful napkins that I had left from my dyeing, and some of the scraps from cutting out the apron. I had a spooky cat. Ooh. I had a spooky cat, a witch's boot, a pumpkin, and some other fun shapes. I used fray check to go around the edges. I'm really pleased with the colours. I think they're really autumnal and quite pretty. And I thought my pumpkin colour theme apron could possibly go over the pumpkin dress that I made for Halloween with the witchy shapes. Or of course be worn over any dress. So you can see me here trying on the apron over the pumpkin dress. And this is just a midway stage of sewing the apron, just a bit of fun really, to try the apron on over a previous project and check if any alterations need to be made. And it's before sewing on the applique, it's just pinned on here. But I'll be sewing it on and adding embroidery too. The pumpkin dress, one with like an enormous crinoline underneath it to make it really pumpkin shaped. If you're interested in the dress, I have a video on making that. I made it from a 1950s pattern, but using 1930s sleeves, and the applique was inspired by the 1920s. For its big pumpkin shape, it has the crinoline underneath, but for a more everyday shape, I can just wear the apron over any garment to create a Halloween look. And you can see here that I also still needed to sew the applique onto the apron. And I realised through trying the apron on here that the straps were too long, and this came from the buttons being sewn on too far back. I needed to reposition them onto the sides of the apron. I was really pleased with the effects. I think it's a really sweet, fun and quick project to create a Halloween inspired outfit that's really wearable for Halloween. Perhaps not so much the crinoline with the pumpkin dress. I was thinking of going somewhere on the London Underground on the tube, and I thought people won't be very pleased if I'm wearing that crinoline when we're all squashed in the train and I'm taking up the space that could be occupied by 8 people. Can you imagine being on a crowded train in this crinoline dress? It would have been awfully useful during the time of social distancing, wouldn't it? I think perhaps I'll have to think of a different plan for travelling on the tube that doesn't involve a large pumpkin-shaped crinoline. And I got on with sewing on all the applique using a variety of embroidery stitches. And here I'm going around the edge of my owl with blanket stitch, and I try to use embroidery thread in the colour palette of the napkins, so browns, oranges and yellows. And for the cat's whiskers I just did a simple back stitch. And I used stranded embroidery cotton, and I divided each of the 6 strands into 2 groups of 3. And here I'm just adding chain stitch to define my pumpkin. And you can see my pumpkin is just held in place with a simple line of running stitches around the edge. It's amazing how decorative just simple running stitches are. And this is how my appliques are looking so far, a pumpkin, an owl, and of course the witch's boot too. And on the owl I'm doing detached chain stitches which just give a feathery effect. And to complete my apron, I found 2 carved wooden buttons from my button jar, and these are positioned at the sides of the apron where they're easy to do up. And let's have a look at what Arietta's been up to. I'm sure it's something fabulous. Thank you for seeing the Halloween inspired aprons created by myself and Arietta, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!